Welcome, traveler. This is Moira. One single disturbing account awaits you. Turn off the lights, adjust your headphones, and don't look back. The promise at the reservoir and the door that breathed at 3 a.m. This was the night Aaron paid, in silence, for a promise he thought he drowned on the shore of Lake Braxton. I went back for work. I'm a survey tech hired by the State Power Authority. My job was to measure the water line of the reservoir during this brutal drought. They sent me because I grew up there, before the dam covered the old town. On the form, it looked simple. Check concrete markers, log coordinates, take photos. On the ground, it wasn't. The lake fell so low, the chapel island came back. St. Ambrose Chapel, small and crooked, stood again on cracked mud. I had seen it only in a faded photo in my mother's living room. I didn't tell anyone, but I wanted to see it myself. I wanted to stand where I promised, as a kid, to tie a ribbon, and never did. I pulled off the highway, took the county road, and parked by the old service dock. The dock was a skeleton of wood, graying with missing planks. The wind moved through the gaps and whistled thin. When I stepped on it, the boards felt spongy, like a slow breath underfoot. The air tasted like rust. Under all that, deep and low, I heard a chain drag. It wasn't waves. The lake was flat. It was something heavier. My chest pinched right away, but I kept going. The job needed photos of the exposed shoreline, and I had a deadline. My father used to say a man keeps what he promised. People there call it an island, but it isn't. It's a hump of land with scrub grass, a ruin, and the edge of an old graveyard. Years ago, someone told me not to climb up. I laughed then. That afternoon, Buck, who watches the tool shed by a decommissioned substation, saw me arrive and walked over. Buck has always been the local explainer. He knows the trees by name and the dates of early frost. He told me the authority wasn't the whole problem. He said drought is an old boss around here. Buck pointed me to the Capel key. He said the good key was in a dented brass case wired under the last bench on the dock. He suggested I take it if I was heading up. He explained the door sticks, but opens if you understand the hour. He said he wasn't trying to scare me. He just told a custom. When the north wind cuts the shore and the hinge moans, that's the hour not to say your own name. He said the door breathes. He said it plain, like a weather note. With each inhale, a person wants to introduce himself. Whoever finishes loses a little of what he carries behind his eyes. I laughed on the outside, not inside. I knew what it feels like when a promise bites. My mom lay in her bedroom, coughing, and asked me to go to the patron day at St. Ambrose. She wanted me to tie a red ribbon for her. I promised. On the day, I played ball. I came back and said I went. My mom died the next month. I stopped thinking about it. At least, I thought I had. Now the chapel stood again, and here I was, with a cheap chance to push it off again. I reached for the brass case. The key was cold and rough. I slipped it in my pocket, and I climbed. Every step left dust that seemed to fall from a ceiling the sky didn't have. The sun was lowering. I carried the laser, the tape, the notepad. I filled my hands so I wouldn't think about my name. On the left, a buried fence traced what had been Main Street. On the right, 3 tilted crosses that the mud had given back. One had my last name on it, spelled wrong. Cold crossed the back of my neck. I didn't remember anyone with my last name buried there. Maybe it belonged to another family. Maybe my body invented a sign. The Capel door was swollen from old damp. The wood had scratch marks, finger or knife. The big lock looked hungry. When I touched the hinge, it moaned. It wasn't a normal squeal. It had a rhythm, in and out. The door moved air from inside to out like a tired chest. I heard "ah" close to my ear and stepped back. My mouth dried out. I drank from the bottle. The water tasted like pennies. The watch on my wrist, my father's old one, stuck on 2:57 and then ticked back a second. I stopped. I breathed. I fit the key. The door gave way with a long sigh. Inside, it smelled like damp and spent candles. Dust fell from the rafters like a fine drizzle. A bench held a bunch of sun-faded ribbons tied in knots. A painted eye of the saint on the back wall had flaked off, but the gaze still seemed to track me. In the corner, a wall clock was frozen near 3. On the altar, a cracked statue of St. Ambrose leaned a little. I'm not a church guy, but I respect rooms that have held a lot of crying. I saw an old gouge on the altar rail, a letter A scratched with a nail. The A was mine from when I was a kid. My stomach turned as I remembered stepping in here before the flood. Me and Liam, my friend, we wanted to ring the bell. The caretaker had told us to leave it alone. Near sunset, I tugged the frayed rope just to see. The rope snapped. We ran. That night it rained, and then the dam started to fill. I had stuffed that piece of guilt in a drawer in my head. The letter in the wood told me I hadn't thrown the key away. I'd only locked it. Inside, I set the tape on the floor, opened the pad, and started the work to mute the memory. The laser flashed readings that blinked backwards for a second. I reset and wrote like nothing happened. Wind pushed through a crack in the wall and made a strip of altar cloth lift like someone walking behind it. Somewhere, a chain dragged again. It wasn't an animal, too heavy. I remembered Buck's warning. Don't say your name. I stepped outside and sat on the threshold to breathe. On the county road, a vehicle stopped far off. It was Lauren, the project engineer, on the handheld. She reminded me they needed the report before dark. No excuses about dust or no bars. She said the bosses wanted a shot with a clear reference object. I said I'd do my best. Lauren has her own pressure. Her contract ends this month and she needs a renewal. I didn't say where I was. I just said the wind was sharp and the shore had changed. I cut the call and went back because the sun was dropping and I had a cheap promise to finally pay. Tie the ribbon. A stray dog followed me up, lean, sunburnt orange. He didn't bark. He sniffed my hand and turned his nose away when I spoke. I tried to read the little brass tag on his collar. It was dull with corrosion. No name. That bothered me more than it should. A creature without a name doesn't seem to weigh on the world. My fingers shook when I tied the first ribbon. Red, like my mom asked. Heat rose from my belly up to my throat. I told her I was there for her, and that I should have gone back then. I said I should have told the truth. I said it the way you say a thought with no sound. Right then, a doorbell note clanged under us, like a bell rung underwater. The dog lifted one ear. The door breathed deeper. Buck showed up again without a noise, as if he had grown from the mud. He looked at me the way people look when they wait on the outcome you owe. I told him what I felt. He said, 3 o'clock is the right hour. He explained that when the lake recedes far enough, the procession returns. Not people, names. Names pass in a line through the door, in and out, until they make a body again. He said whoever helps the names find each other gets peace. Whoever gets in the way loses a piece of his own. He said it without looking at me. My mouth went dry. I could have left. I could have handed the key back and closed the day. Instead, I made a promise. I promised Buck I would return the key that same night, lock the door, and leave it as I found it. I promised myself I wouldn't say my name, not even if I heard it. It wasn't a time to play tough. I badly needed to fall asleep as myself. The sun went down, the wind turned colder. From a distance, the chapel looked like a chest in the dark, a slow rise and fall. I fixed my flashlight on a stake and started my last round of measurements. The watch jumped to 240. I looked up. I was sure I heard steps on the ceiling. No one could be up there. The dog growled at an empty corner. A soft rain of discs fell from one spot in the rafters as if someone tapped the wood with a broom handle. My stomach rolled again. I took the photos. The focus locked once, and then, when it let go, it caught my reflection in the cracked window lagging behind me. My arm moved, and the reflection followed a beat late. I know cameras can do that in low light with LEDs, but not like that. I stepped back and hit my calf on a pew. The pew groaned, and it sounded like someone taking in air between teeth. I stepped out to breathe. At night, the shoreline changes its face. Everything turns into edges. Woods and water trade places when the wind runs the flats. I don't like to talk about fear, but it wasn't fear of Glos. It was fear of not knowing how to get back into myself when I left. I knew the place liked to keep things. I sat at the last pew, the one with the case wired under it. The dented brass whined under my hand. I took out the key and rolled it in my fingers until I felt the sharp seam. My head spun with the weight of years I had kept on layaway. I told myself I would lock up. The clock wall clicked, even though it was dead. The dog lay by the threshold and pretended to sleep. That's when I heard it. The voice came from behind the wall. Not a saint, not an animal. It was the voice that lives between memory and ear, the kind you catch on a bus when someone speaks close and you understand without turning. I heard my mother say she was there, that it was cold, that I would need to say my name so she could find me. She used to say that at the county fair when I got lost. "Tell me your name, kid." I saw the trick. The place knew where to press. Wind whistled through the gaps, thin as a needle. The hinge moaned. The door took a long breath. The air touched my face. I swore I wouldn't answer. I trapped my tongue with my teeth. My chest squeezed so hard I wanted to cough. Thirst hit again, hot. The voice called again, only the first half, and the rest stuck up in the rafters, bumping. I filled my lungs the way you do to shake water out of your ears. Tears came from anger and shame. I spoke. Quiet, but I did. I said my full name, the way you say it for roll call. Right away, something pulled the air back out of me. It wasn't wind, it was the door, a strong draw. The world shrank by a finger width. My tongue went heavy. I almost said my last name again to complete it, but it locked up. The door exhaled slow. In that one breath, I lost an image. The face of my friend Liam as a kid slid out of reach. I knew he existed. I knew he ran on that street. I couldn't bring his face to sit on his name. I understood the rule without anyone saying it. Each answer costs a memory. If you answer too much, you get too light to remember how to walk home. I'm no hero. I couldn't sit there. I stood up on shaky legs. I went to the altar and tied a second ribbon, blue, for me. A cramp bit my hand. The watch on their wrist froze at 2:57 again. I said inside that was enough, that the door could breathe without me. The chain scraped outside, closer now. It touched wood. The distant bell turned into knocking on thin boards, like someone asking to come in without touching. Instinct made me slide the key in from the inside and turn it. The lock clicked. It was a mistake and a fix at once. The dog lifted his head and looked at me without seeing me. The voice in the rafters went quiet. The door stopped breathing for a moment that felt too long. When it returned, it sighed with anger or relief. I couldn't tell. Buck came into my mind. I needed to give him the key, like I'd promised. I left in a hurry, slipping on the clay. The wind cut the shore and brought a stronger metal smell. Cold touched the back of my ear. Buck came into my mind. I needed to give him the key, like I'd promised. I left in a hurry, slipping on the clay. The wind cut the shore and brought a stronger metal smell. Cold touched the back of my ear. Buck waited on the dock, sitting like he'd never left. He watched me the way men watch a field in hail. I told him what I'd done. I told him about the voice in the rafters, the urge to say my name, the pull on the air. I didn't use a spooky tone. I used the voice of a man who broke an old promise and kept a new one fast to make up for it. Buck listened quiet. Then he said he'd done his part telling me the rule. He said the door breathes so it won't burst. He said the search of the names needs a break. He held out his hand for the key. I thought he'd pocket it. I gave it over. Buck gripped it hard. Instead of tucking it away, he stood. He said he'd take it where it belonged. I understood late. Where it belonged was the water. Buck tossed the key into the reservoir, right at the dark edge, tasting the day's mud. Metal makes a different sound when it hits old streets. I objected, careful. I said it was the saint's key, that we'd need it when the next dry spell came. Buck said the house knows how to guard what lives in it. He said the door only opens when it wants. Without a key, anyone who tries will have to ask the place for its name. Not many will risk that. I felt a flash of anger at Buck. I thought he did it for himself, to keep a small mystery under town hands, like men do in small places. I didn't say that out loud. He read it anyway. He said he knew I snapped the bell rope boy. He said he didn't blame me. He said that day was the place's way of taking the noise away. My eyes went wide. I asked how he knew. Buck pointed toward the scratched A on the altar. He said every watchman learns to read wood. Apology is something else, he said. Here we learn the cost. On the way back to the motel, I passed the dirt field the sun had cut into squares. A light pole used its own shadow like a crutch. A crew guy who'd ridden in with me waved and called out, "Aaron!" I flinched. The word tickled behind my eye, but didn't stick. For a second, I didn't know the sound that had always been mine. I waved back. At the front desk, the clerk asked for my ID. I pulled my wallet and felt cold sweat. My driver's license was there, black letters. I read my names as if they belonged to someone else. I stepped into the hall to breathe. I tried calling Lauren to close the report. The call dropped twice. When it went through, she asked hard for the numbers. I read them quick. She asked for a photo set. I sent it. Minutes later, she wrote back that the coordinates had a strange drift. She said my GPS went nuts. I swore it hadn't. I opened the images to check. In 2 shots, the laser line slid away from the target like it refused that spot. I stayed up rewriting numbers that didn't agree with themselves. I woke at 5 to a chain dragging on the roof. I climbed on a chair and opened the window. No gutter up there. The wind carried the reservoir smell right into my room. The orange dog sat on the sidewalk, looking at the motel door. I tried to whistle. Nothing came out. I put a hand on my throat. My voice was there, but softer, like it had walked a long way. I knew I had left a slice of it in the chapel's breath. I remembered the grade school roll call and how fast I used to answer. Now, thinking hurt. I repeated my name inside my head so the muscle wouldn't forget the steps. I went back to the island at first light, alone. Buck wasn't on the dock. I unlocked my mind and went with no key. The door stood a palm open, like I had left it. The dog walked in with me, soundless. The wall clock stayed stuck at 2:57. I tied a third ribbon, white, with no words. I put my fingertips on the wood. The grain pressed a short memory back into me. Me, small, running, laughing, with Liam, and his face still missing. I felt like crying and didn't. I stood still and let the rise and fall of air wash a bit of the anger away. The name's procession moved slow. You don't see it, you feel it. It's like the warm push when you open an oven door. On both sides of the altar, the names walked. They didn't speak, they were heavy, like letters on a license, like my mother's old grocery lists. The place gave some back and kept others. I saw why a house would guard what lives there. It's not to hide something bad. It's to stop everything without a body from leaking out. I left without locking it. I left it how it was. Down by the levee road, I met Miss Sadie, who sells cheese from a cooler and knows everybody's story without asking. She said St. Ambrose's procession happens now with mud steps. She said the ones who missed the day the water came return with the drought, one by one. She said when the water rises again, folks won't talk about promises, only price. I asked without words what mine was. She said it was light. I'd have to learn my own name fresh each time someone called me. She said, that's good for men who think they own their bodies. She laughed with one corner of her mouth and gave me a piece of salty cheese. At the project office that afternoon, Lauren said the authority would order a second inspection. She said my report lacked a clear reference photo of the door. She said there was a shadow in the metadata that didn't line up. I knew the shot she meant, my lagging reflection. She chalked it up to a lens quirk. I said, maybe. I apologized for the drift. She said she understood that the place gets into locals. Techs have left without things out there, she told me. One guy's internal clock went off beat. Another forgot how to shift for a few hours. I smiled polite. Inside, I knew she was speaking about something else. She didn't quit after that. She stayed. I stayed until I wrapped the measurements. After, I didn't want another contract near that water. On my last night before leaving, I went again. The moon drew a pale path across the clay. The door breathed as always, patient. I leaned my forehead to the wood. I smelled rest and old wax. I said inside, plain, I know I promised and walked off. I know the bell rope snapped in my hand and I told no one. I know I said my name when I shouldn't. I know a name is something you lend and then have to take back with care. The door took it in. I turned and didn't stare. The dog followed halfway and stopped. Buck waited up the road. He said he was done with that job. He said a watchman is a man who looks and returns things. He said I had learned. I asked him with a gesture if he was sure. He nodded. He said the younger crew needs another kind of explainer now, not someone who talks pretty or rough, someone who can point at the wind and ask for silence at the right second. I understood. I didn't push back. I raised a hand. He walked off without turning around. The next week, back in the city, a foreman on a job called me Late Guy. The nickname stuck. When someone tried Aaron, I paused a beat to fit myself into it. It wasn't confusion, it was the cost. In return, my chest stopped hurting when I saw red ribbons on truck mirrors. I stop dreaming of water climbing my father's hallway. Some nights a chain drags by my window. I open and let it pass. I don't flip the light. I learn to breathe along. No clerk will file this. It's not a confession for police. It's a record, the way I can tell it, for people who like the sound of back roads. The place has memory. It doesn't want to scare you. It wants to hold what we toss away in a hurry. If you go there one day and the door is breathing, remember Buck's warning. Don't say your name. Tie a plain ribbon. Lock it if you have to. And understand that sometimes the one you came to save wants the key to something else. I'll return when the lake drops again, not to measure, to listen. Maybe I'll recognize Liam's face if I stop giving things up in that breath. Maybe I'll look at the scratched A on the rail and accept that kids mess up, but grown men choose. For now, I'll keep the nickname. It buys me time. It saves me from the jump of being called complete. When the north wind slices the shore and the hinge moans, I stop and listen. If someone knocks without touching, I answer with silence. Then I walk on. The county road knows my step. The reservoir knows my weight. The house knows now that I understand. A promise shoved tomorrow comes back across the water, carrying our name. And that traveler was Aaron's account, showing that a promise delayed will charge interest in your own name. Now tell me, have you ever crossed a boundary thinking it was just a shortcut, and it crossed back over you?